Welcome to Starbound's Fantasy channel. My name is Carol, and I'll be your narrator for today. Before we get started with the story, go ahead, check and make sure that you're subscribed. It's 100% free, and it allows our stories to pop up in your feed more often. With that, let's get started. The rusted flagon smelled of desperation and cheap ale. Arsel Thorne stood on a small, rickety platform that the owner generously called a stage, strumming a second-hand lute while sweat trickled down his back. His fingers plucked a jaunty melody as his audience, 5 drunks and a barmaid with tired eyes, barely looked up from their cups. "A toast to the night, to the flagon's weak light," Arsel sang, careful to keep his words simple and his rhymes inconsequential. "May your sorrows take flight and your purses stay tight." He'd learned years ago to avoid flourishes, to resist the urge to truly captivate. When he did, things happened. Strange things. Dangerous things. The last time he'd let his guard down, a tavern in the lower quarter had erupted in blue flames that danced on water, yet didn't burn flesh. The magistrate had called it arson. The local priest labeled him demon-touched. Several magical academies had dismissed his applications with laughter or disgust. "Magic doesn't work that way," they'd said. "Proper magic requires proper tools, wands, formulas, and years of study." A burly man with a face like creased leather slammed his mug down. "Oi, bad boy! Sing something worth my copper!" Arsel flashed a practiced smile. "Any particular requests, good sir?" "Yeah," the man sneered. "Sing about how a talentless hack ended up boring decent folk to death." The tavern patron snickered, and Arsel felt heat creep up his neck. He kept his smile frozen in place. One more song, one more pitiful hand of copper, and he could leave this dump. "A song of critique from a man so unique," Arsel began, his voice deliberately flat, "whose intellect peaks when he's too drunk to speak." The tavern went quiet. Arsel knew he should stop. Rhymes fueled by anger never ended well. But the man's smug grin pushed him further. "His wit, sharp as mud, his charm thick as blood, his thoughts clear as cud from a cow freshly chewed." The man's ale began to bubble violently. Arsel's eyes widened as he tried to halt his verse, but the patrons had already noticed the tankard's contents boiling without flame. The mug suddenly burst, spraying scalding liquid across the heckler's face. The man howled, toppling backward off his stool. "Demon!" he screamed, clutching his reddened face. "He burned me with devil work!" The tavern keeper emerged from behind the bar with alarming speed for a man of his girth. "Out!" he bellowed, pointing a sausage-like finger toward the door. "And don't expect payment, troublemaker!" Arsel opened his mouth to protest, but thought better of it. He'd seen that look before. He packed his loot with shaking hands and slipped out into the night. The alley behind the rusted flagon stank of piss and rotting vegetables. Arsel crouched beside a rain barrel, counting the coins in his purse for the 3rd time. The results didn't change. 3 copper pennies and a button that vaguely resembled a silver coin in poor light. Not enough for rent. Barely enough for a stale loaf of bread. "Counting won't make 'em multiply, lad." Arsel jumped, his hand instinctively moving to the small knife at his belt. An old man stood at the mouth of the alley, his silver-streaked beard hanging to his chest, eyes bright despite the dim light. "Gristle," Arsel sighed, relaxing slightly. "Skulking around dark corners now?" "Skulking's a specialty of mine," Gristle replied, his voice raspy from years of performing in smoke-filled taverns. "Besides, you looked like you could use a friend after that little display." Arsel winced. "Word travels fast." "Always does when it comes to our kind of trouble." Gristle approached, his gait uneven but purposeful. "Speaking of trouble, heard about the fancy to-do at the Elven Conservatory tonight?" "The Convergence?" Arsel scoffed. Only the most exclusive magical event of the century. What about it?
They pay performers handsomely. For atmosphere like gold pieces, not copper.
Arcel narrowed his eyes. They also execute humans who crash their parties. Especially humans with irregularities. Gristle's laugh dissolved into a hacking cough.
True enough. Good thing I got this then.
He pulled a folded paper from his sleeve. In the meager moonlight, Arcel could make out an elegant gold seal. An invitation? How did you...
Let's just say the printer owed me a favor.
Gristle pressed the parchment into Arcel's palm.
The Convergence needs one more server for the evening. Quiet work, good pay. Keep your head down, your arms to yourself, and you'll walk out with enough gold to clear your debts.
Arcel stared at the invitation. Why give this to me? Why not use it yourself? Gristle glanced around before leaning closer.
Too old to get the pass for Sturvensaf, me. Besides, you got the gift stronger than most. Might do you good to see how the pointed ears practice their craft.
Before Arcel could respond, Gristle melted back into the shadows, leaving only his parting words hanging in the air.
Mind you, don't start any fires this time.
The Elven Conservatory of Arcane Arts rose from the center of Luminar City like a frozen waterfall, its twisting spires and delicate arches challenging gravity with each impossible curve. Arcel approached cautiously, trying to mimic the brisk, purposeful walk of the elven servants who streamed through a side entrance. He'd spent his last penny on boot polish and had scrubbed to his face till it hurt. The forged invitation identified him as a replacement server from Thornwood Staffing, a detail he desperately hoped no one would verify. A slim, elven guard stood at the servant's entrance, checking documents with exaggerated boredom. When Arcel presented his invitation, the guard hardly glanced at the paper before waving him through. The ease of his entry was almost insulting. The guard so confident in elven superiority that the possibility of a human infiltration never crossed his mind. Inside, Arcel was swept into a flurry of activity. Servants in crisp uniforms arranged exotic flowers, positioned delicate glassware, and polished surfaces that already gleamed. An officious elf thrust a silver tray of tiny, jewel-like tarts into his hands and pointed him toward the main hall. The convergence itself stole Arcel's breath. The grand hall stretched impossibly high, dotted with floating globes of multicolored light. Elegant elves in robes woven with luminescent thread glided across marble floors, their movements liquid grace. At the center of the hall, a master of ceremonies directed a series of magical demonstrations on a raised platform. Arcel distributed his tarts mechanically, attention fixed on the platform where an elven woman in midnight blue traced complex patterns with a white gold wand. Each perfect movement produced shimmering fractals of light that assembled into a miniature replica of the conservatory itself. The audience applauded politely. Arcel observed their restrained reactions, the subtle nods of approval. These were people who'd seen ice sculptures conjured countless times, who measured magic by its technical flawlessness rather than its wonder. As he circulated, Arcel noticed an elf seated apart from the others. Unlike the rapt attention shown by most attendees, this woman bent over a massive tome, scribbling notes with rapid, irritated movements. Pale, silver-white hair fell in a curtain around her face, partially obscuring violet eyes narrowed in concentration. While everyone else wore ceremonial robes in vibrant colors, her simple gray attire marked her as staff rather than a guest. A librarian or researcher, perhaps. Arcel drifted closer, curiosity overcoming caution. Over her shoulder, he glimpsed not diligent academic notes, but small, sarcastic sketches and commentary. Beside a drawing of the ice sculptor, she'd written, "Kirill demonstrates the 304th identical ice palace of her career. Revolutionary." A surprised laugh escaped Arcel before he could stop it. The woman's head snapped up, violet eyes locking onto his. He froze, tray clutched before him like a shield. "Tart?" he offered weakly. She studied him with unnerving intensity. "You find my observations amusing?" "I find honesty refreshing," he replied, matching her quiet tone. "Especially in a place drowning in pretension." A flicker of surprise crossed her face. Before she could respond, a commotion rippled through the crowd. The enchanted heating system had faltered, leaving the vast hall increasingly cold. Elven nobles hugged themselves, breath fogging in the rapidly chilling air. The master of ceremonies attempted to continue, but his voice shook with either cold or embarrassment. "A minor inconvenience, esteemed guests! Our specialist will resolve this momentarily." "Ridiculous," the silver-haired woman muttered. "The Great Convergence, undone by a faulty heating charm." Arsel looked around. Servers were scrambling, fetching cloaks and warming drinks for increasingly agitated guests. An idea took root. Dangerous, foolish, but potentially profitable. If he could discreetly solve the problem, grateful elves might loosen up enough to shower him with gold. He set down his tray and slipped behind a pillar, composing a simple warming verse in his mind. Nothing flashy, just enough to take the edge off the chill. He'd done this before, warming his tiny room during winter nights when coin for firewood ran short. "From hearth and flame, from summer's kiss," he whispered, fingers tingling. "Bring warmth to chase this cold abyss." He expected a gentle rise in temperature, perhaps a sensation of sunlight on skin. Instead, magic exploded from him in a visible wave of heat that rippled outward like disturbed water. The chill vanished instantly, replaced by oppressive warmth. Droplets of water formed on every surface as frost melted. The ice sculpture collapsed into a puddle. Worse, the tapestries lining the wall nearest Arsel began to smoke, then burst into flames. Pandemonium erupted. Elves scattered, their perfect composure shattered. Guards materialized from alcoves, wands drawn. Arsel stepped back, looking for an escape route, but found himself cornered. As the guards closed in, Arsel's gaze met the violet eyes of the woman with the book. Unlike the chaos surrounding her, she remained perfectly still, staring at him with an expression of not fear, but stunned recognition. Arsel backed against the pillar as the three guards approached, wands leveled at his chest. His mind raced through a dozen half-formed verses, each more likely to worsen his situation than improve it. "This one!" announced the lead guard. "Control restraints and—" A slim hand gripped Arsel's arm. "There you are," snapped the silver-haired woman, materializing at his side. "I've been looking everywhere for you." The guards hesitated. "Archivist Moonweave," said the leader. "This human—" "Is my research assistant," she finished. "Clearly overwhelmed by his first convergence. I'll handle his disciplinary review." "But the fires—" "Were started by the fallen candelabras, obviously." Her tone brooked no argument. "Unless you're suggesting my assistant possesses magical abilities beyond those of most full-blooded elves, in which case the Archmagister would certainly want to interview all of us about such an extraordinary claim." The guards exchanged uncertain glances. "Now, if you'll excuse us," she continued, "the climate control artifacts need adjustment before the next demonstration." Without waiting for a response, she pulled Arsel through a narrow door partially hidden behind a tapestry. They entered a dimly lit corridor. The woman released his arm as if it burned her and whirled to face him, violet eyes ablaze. "You," she hissed, "are either remarkably stupid or suicidally brave. Which is it?" Arsel raised his eyebrows. "Is desperately poor an option?" "This isn't a joke. Do you have any idea what you just did?" "Warmed up a stuffy party?" Her nostrils flared. "You performed breath weaving in a room full of the most powerful elven mages in the realm. Magic that shouldn't even exist anymore." Arsel's practiced nonchalance faltered. "Breath? What?" "Don't play ignorance with me, human." "Trust me, lady, I'm not playing." He leaned against the wall, affecting casualness despite his racing heart.
7 magical academies have called me everything from fraud to demon-touched. None of them mentioned breath-weaving.
She studied him with narrowed eyes.
You truly don't know?
Know what? The woman glanced down the corridor.
Not here.
She grabbed his wrist again, pulling him deeper into the maze of service passages.
I'm Valeris Moonweave, Chief Archivist of the Historical Collections. And you are?
Arsel Thorn, soon-to-be-dead street performer, apparently.
Your death isn't certain yet,
Valeris replied, without humor.
Your stupidity, however, seems well established.
Says the woman currently aiding and abetting said stupid human, Arsel shot back. Why are you helping me, anyway? She didn't answer immediately, leading him down a spiral staircase that descended far below the main building. The air grew cool and dry, tinged with the unmistakable scent of old parchment and leather bindings.
Because,
she finally said, as they reached a massive oak door emblazoned with silver runes,
if what I just witnessed was genuine, you're either the greatest magical fraud in history or the most significant magical discovery in 3 centuries. My curiosity demands clarification.
Valeris pressed her palm against the center rune. It glowed briefly, and the door swung inward with a soft groan. Beyond lay row upon row of towering bookshelves, stretching into shadow.
Welcome to the restricted archives, Valeris said. If you try to steal anything, the binding spells will turn your blood to ink. Touch only what I give you, and we might both survive this idiocy.
The restricted archives smelled of secrets and dust. Arsel followed Valeris through narrow aisles formed by shelves that reached beyond the light of the enchanted lamps she'd activated. Occasionally, his sleeve brushed against a book that whispered or growled in response.
So,
he ventured as she scanned the shelf markers. Are you always this charming, or am I just getting special treatment?
I've risked my position and possibly my life bringing you here,
Valeris replied without looking at him.
Forgive me if I don't match your tavern crown repertory.
Ah, but you noticed it was tavern quality. You spent time in human establishments then? Slumming it with the short-lived? She shot him a venomous look.
I've spent time studying comparative magical traditions across cultures. Academic interest only.
Of course, pure scholarly pursuit, nothing to do with those rebellious little drawings in your margins. Her steps faltered almost imperceptibly.
You saw nothing.
I saw enough to know you're not the model Elven academic you pretend to be. Arsel's voice softened. Look, I appreciate the rescue, but I'd like to know why I'm worth the risk. Everything has a give and take. Valeris stopped before a section of shelving concealed behind a translucent barrier that rippled like disturbed water. She pressed her archivist medallion against it, and the barrier parted.
Because,
she said, pulling out a worn leather volume,
for 300 years, I've been told that what you did upstairs, magic through verse alone, without wands or formal structures, was a primitive myth, a human delusion, or at worst, a dangerous abnormality that we benevolent elves helped eradicate for the good of all races.
She placed the book on a nearby table and opened it carefully. Arsel leaned forward to see faded illustrations of humans surrounded by colorful auras, their mouths open in song or speech.
Breath-weaving,
Valeris continued,
was supposedly a primitive precursor to proper structured magic. Yet you just performed a warming charm that overwhelms the work of 7 master climate artificers.
Arsel frowned. If this breath-weaving was real, why don't humans use it now? Why 7 rejections from magical academies that insisted proper magic requires wands?
That's,
Valeris said, pulling more books from the hidden section,
is the question that's occupied the last 50 years of my research.
For the next hour, they pored over the ancient text. It's not like Arsel had much better to do at this point anyway. Valeris translated passages in languages Arsel had never seen, revealing fragments of a history absent from common knowledge. Accounts of human settlements where spoken verses raised buildings, healed the sick, and transformed the land.
diplomatic records describing Elven delegations' alarm at humans shaping reality through mere words. Treatises arguing that such unstructured magic threatened the fabric of existence itself. Here, Valeris said, pushing forward a weathered journal. The private records of Archmagister Ilindar, dated to the final Concordat era. Arsel skimmed the spidery script, translating slowly with Valeris's help. His blood chilled at what he read. Detailed plans for what the author called the Great Correction, a magical plague designed to damage the specific portion of the human brain capable of connecting language directly to magical energies, followed by the introduction of wand-based magic as a generous alternative that required physical movements Elven physiology was better suited to perform. "They crippled us," he whispered. "Deliberately." "It appears so," Valeris replied, her voice carefully neutral despite the tightness around her eyes. "Though I can't verify if this plan was actually implemented or—" "Oh, it was implemented," Arsel cut in, bitterness rising like bile. "Why else would I spend my life being told my magic was wrong? Broken, dangerous. They rewrote the rules of the game to ensure they'd always win." "Not all elves would have known, but the ones in charge did." Arsel paced, words spilling out in agitated near verse that made the air crackle around him. "Every time a human child showed signs of this ability, this breath weaving, they were labeled defective, unstable. We're not broken. We're the survivors, the ones the plague couldn't fully silence." Valeris watched him warily. "If that's true, you need to calm down. Your emotions are feeding your power and—" The massive doors to the archive burst open. 3 elves entered, led by a tall figure in robes the color of sunset. His copper hair was streaked with white, but he moved with the vigor of youth, golden eyes scanning the chamber before locking onto them with laser focus. "Archivist Moonweave," he said, voice deceptively mild. "I don't recall authorizing after-hours access to the restricted section, particularly with unauthorized guests." Valeris straightened, sliding the most damning text behind less controversial volumes. "Archmagister Thelin, I was conducting urgent research related to the climate control failure at tonight's demonstration." "Indeed." Thelin's gaze shifted to Arsel, who fought the urge to shrink under its intensity. "And this human serves what function in your research?" "Comparative analysis," Valeris replied smoothly. "Magical effects on different physiologies. Purely academic." "Purely academic," Thelin repeated, stepping closer. "Then you wouldn't mind if I verify his credentials?" He raised a wand and tendrils of golden light extended toward Arsel. Arsel stepped back instinctively. He felt the tendrils probing at his mind, seeking confirmation of the lies Valeris had told. Without thinking, he muttered under his breath, "Shadows cloak and truth obscure, secrets deep remain secure." The golden tendrils wavered, then dissipated. Thelin's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed dangerously. "Guards," he said quietly. "Summon the silencers." Valeris moved with startling speed, grabbing Arsel's arm while snatching a rolled parchment from the table. "Run!" she hissed, dragging him toward a narrow passage between bookshelves. Behind them, Thelin shouted commands. Arsel heard the distinct sound of wands being drawn, felt the crackle of offensive magic gathering. Valeris pulled him through a dizzying maze of turns, finally stopping before a blank stone wall. She pressed her medallion to the surface, and the stones rearranged themselves to reveal a narrow tunnel. "Maintenance passage," she gasped as they squeezed through. "Used by the archive tenders. It leads to the lower city." The wall sealed itself behind them, muffling the sounds of pursuit. Arsel leaned against the rough stone, heart hammering. "You," he said between breaths, "are definitely not the model Elven academic." In the dim light of the passage's sparse enchanted markers, he saw Valeris' smile for the first time, quick and sharp, like the edge of a blade. "You're welcome," she replied. Though I might have just thrown away 3 centuries of work to save a human who thinks tavern rhymes count as high art.
Hey, those rhymes just saved us from your boss finding out everything.
Temporarily. She glanced at the sealed entrance. But trust me, Arselthorn, if those silencers catch us, you'll wish Thelen had just executed you outright. The maintenance tunnel opened into a drainage channel on the lower levels of Luminar City, where the pristine elven architecture of the upper districts gave way to the ramshackle ingenuity of human construction. Valeris grimaced as her boots splashed through shallow, foul-smelling water. Charming, she muttered. Is all human infrastructure designed to double as sewer?
Only the parts we reserve for unexpected elven visitors, Arsel replied, watching with amusement as she picked her way across slippery stones. You know, for someone who just committed career suicide, you're remarkably concerned about your footwear.
300 years of existence teaches you priorities, she shot back. Clean boots rank just below avoiding capture by magical enforcers and slightly above the comfort of irritating humans. They emerged into a narrow alley between crooked buildings that leaned together like drunken conspirators. Night had fully descended, and the moons cast long shadows across the cobblestones. Arsel took the lead, navigating the warren of the lower quarter with ease. Where exactly are we going? Valeris asked.
Somewhere safe, Arsel replied. At least, I hope it's safe. I haven't exactly had time to call ahead.
You hope?
Valeris stopped, crossing her arms.
We're being hunted by silencers, and your plan is based on hope.
Would you prefer we just march back to the Conservatory and explain we were just borrowing some light reading material?
I'd prefer a plan from someone who doesn't perform magical parlor tricks for beer money.
Funny, I don't recall you having a better suggestion when we were running for our lives. Arsel stepped closer, voice dropping. Besides, I seem to remember you were the one who dragged me into the Forbidden Library for some light treason. Having second thoughts about slumming it with the short-lived? They glared at each other. For a moment, Arsel thought she might actually leave, return to her world of ancient tomes and academic safety. Then her shoulders slumped slightly. Lead on, wordsmith, she said, the fight gone from her voice. But if your safe place turns out to be another tavern, I'm taking my chances with Thelen. Gristle's tenement apartment was technically condemned, but, as he often said,
ain't nothing more permanent than temporary arrangements.
Arsel knocked on the warped wooden door in a specific pattern. 2 quick, 1 slow, 3 quick. No response. He tried again, louder. Still nothing.
Your safe haven appears to be abandoned, Valeris observed.
Arsel pressed his ear to the door. Silence. Not even the usual shuffling and muttering that accompanied Gristle's movements. Unease tightened in his chest. Something's wrong, he said, trying the handle. Locked. He pulled out his small belt knife and worked at the simple mechanism until it clicked. The apartment beyond was in disarray, more so than Gristle's usual creative chaos. Furniture upturned, papers scattered. Most telling was the absence of Gristle's prized possessions. His ceremonial drum, his collection of foreign coins, his traveling pack. He's gone, Arsel said, surveying the space. Packed in a hurry. A friend? Valeris asked, examining the scattered papers with scholarly interest. Mentor, fellow performer, occasional pain in my ass. Arsel picked up a broken lute string coiled on the floor. He gave me the invitation to the convergence. He must have known something.
About breath weaving?
Maybe. Arsel moved to the rickety table where Gristle normally kept his correspondence. Most papers were gone, but a small note had fallen behind the table, overlooked in haste. He unfolded it carefully. Safe house compromised. Silencers active in lower quarter.
Go to Whisper's End if trouble follows. Ask for the Sparrow's Nest.
G. Arsel handed the note to Valeris. Does that mean anything to you? Whisper's End? She frowned. It's a village in the foothills of the Howling Mountains. Small, isolated. Primarily human with some half-elven residents.
She returned the note. About 3 days' travel northeast. Well, unless you've got a better destination in mind, that's where we're headed. A new voice spoke up from the doorway. I might suggest an intermediate stop first. Arsel whirled, a half-formed verse on his lips. A middle-aged woman stood in the doorway, her dark hair streaked with gray, eyes sharp and knowing. Lark, Arsel breathed, relief washing through him. Arsel, she replied with a tight smile. And company, I see. Her gaze traveled over Valeris, noting the elven features with suspicion. This is Valeris, Arsel said. She's complicated. I assumed as much given the state of the quarter tonight. Silencers don't deploy in force for simple matters. Lark's attention turned to Arsel. Word from the broken verse is that you made quite an impression at the convergence. The broken verse? Valeris interjected. Lark ignored her. We need to move. There's a safe house in Midtown that's still secure. Bram is getting the others there. Others? Arsel asked. Like you. Like us. Lark gestured impatiently. Breathweavers. Now, are you coming or would you prefer to wait for the silencers to find you? The safe house turned out to be beneath a textile shop owned by a portly human merchant with quick eyes and a permanently worried expression. He ushered them through his stockroom and down a concealed staircase without a word, though his gaze lingered suspiciously on Valeris. Below, a large basement had been converted into a comfortable living space. Thick carpets muffled sound and bookshelves lined the walls. A dozen people of various ages sat in small groups, conversing in low tones. All fell silent when Arsel, Lark, and Valeris entered. An elderly man with a magnificent white beard approached them. Despite his age, he moved with fluid grace, and his deep blue eyes sparkled with vitality. Arsel Thorn, he said, voice surprisingly rich. Your performance at the Convergence has caused quite a stir. So I've gathered, Arsel replied. You would be Bram, I take it? Indeed. The old man turned to Valeris, his expression cooling. And what brings an archivist of the Conservatory to our humble gathering? Before Valeris could answer, Arsel stepped forward. She helped me escape, risked everything to do it. He hesitated, then added, She showed me the truth about what was done to human magic. Bram's eyebrows rose. Did she now? Interesting. He studied Valeris with renewed intensity. I've lived 97 years, young lady, and you're the first elf I've met who acknowledged that history, let alone aided one of us. I follow evidence where it leads, Valeris replied stiffly. The documents I found suggest a deliberate suppression of breathweaving through magical means, a spell plague designed to damage human magical abilities. A ripple of reaction spread through the gathering. Some looked shocked, others grimly vindicated. Not just suppression, Bram said quietly. Eradication. But clearly, not entirely successful. He gestured to the assembled people. Welcome to the broken verse, wordsmith. We are the descendants of those who survived the plague, those born with partial or full immunity to its effects. Arsel looked around the room with new eyes. All of you can do what I do? To varying degrees, Lark explained. My verses heal wounds and ease pain. Bram's reveal hidden truths. Others affect emotions, create illusions, enhance physical abilities. None of us has formal training, so we teach each other. Preserve what knowledge we can. Why wasn't I told about this before? Arsel asked, looking around at the gathered breathweavers. Protection through isolation, Bram explained. We watch for those with the gifts, but we only approach when absolutely necessary. Your abilities were strong, but controllable enough that you weren't in immediate danger. Until recently. Drawing you in prematurely would have risked exposing our entire network if you were ever caught or questioned. We've existed in secret for centuries, Bram continued. Living between cracks of society, disguising our abilities as strange talents or parlor tricks. But lately, the silencers have become more active. more methodical in their hunting. The convergence, Valeris realized. The timing isn't coincidental. No, Bram agreed. We believe the Magical Preservation Council has redoubled efforts to eliminating remaining Breathweavers, which makes your display tonight particularly problematic. Arsel winced. I didn't exactly plan. A thunderous crash from above cut him off. Dust sifted from the ceiling as heavy footsteps sounded on the floor of the shop. Silencers, Bram murmured. They found us. Panic rippled through the room. Lark immediately began organizing evacuation through a hidden tunnel. Bram beckoned Arsel and Valeris closer. You must reach Whisper's End, he said urgently. Gristle was headed there with the others when we learned of the increased silencer activity. Find Sela. She knows more about the original plague than anyone alive. Come with us, Arsel urged. Bram shook his head. I'm too old for mountain paths. Besides, he smiled grimly, these silencers could use a lesson in humility. Another crash sounded, closer. Arsel heard the shop owner's frightened protests, then silence. Take the eastern passage, Bram instructed, pressing a small key into Arsel's palm. It emerges near the old tannery. From there, follow the river north until dawn, then head for the mountains. Bram! Arsel began. Go, the old man insisted. He turned to Valeris. Keep him alive, Archivist. He's more important than either of you realize. Before either could respond, the ceiling partially collapsed. Black-robed figures descended through the dust, wielding silver wands that gleamed ominously in the lamplight. Chaos erupted. Breathweavers scattered, some fighting back with hastily composed verses, others fleeing toward the hidden exits. Arsel grabbed Valeris' arm and pulled her toward the eastern passage, but stopped when he saw Lark confronted by a tall silencer. She sang a soft, rippling melody, a healing verse turned offensive that should have caused disorientation and weakness. The silencer merely smiled, touching his silver wand to his throat. A collar of light appeared, deflecting her magic. Anti-resonance shields, Valeris explained, pulling Arsel toward the exit. Standard silencer equipment. We can't help her. Arsel hesitated, torn between helping Lark and escaping. Behind them, Bram stood firm, reciting a complex verse that created swirling mists of confusion. The silencers' advance slowed, but their collars protected them from the worst effects. Arsel, now! Valeris urged. With a final glance at the chaos, Lark subdued, Bram standing defiant amid swirling mist, Arsel followed Valeris into the narrow eastern passage, the sounds of battle fading behind them. For 2 days, they traveled north along the winding river that fed Luminar City, avoiding main roads and settlements. Valeris proved surprisingly adaptable to rough travel, though she maintained a running commentary on the primitive conditions. Arsel found himself caught between irritation at her complaints and admiration for her resilience. They camped the second night in a small cave overlooking the river. Arsel built a fire while Valeris studied the map she'd taken from the archives, the one showing ancient sites of breathweaving significance. The Echo Chambers, she said, pointing to a location marked in faded ink. Near Whisper's End. The map describes it as the last repository of unbroken voice. Sounds promising, Arsel replied, arranging their meager provisions for dinner. Though I'd settle for a place where the silencers won't find us. The mountains have always been too difficult for Elven authorities to control. Too many caves, too much old magic in the stone. She rolled up the map carefully. It's why many half-elves settle here. Neither culture fully accepts them, so they build their own. Like Sela, the one Bram mentioned? Presumably. Valeris warmed her hands by the fire. Half-elves live longer than humans, but shorter than elves. They often develop unconventional perspectives on interspecies relations. Arsel smirked. Sounds dangerous. The Council must hate that. The Council fears what it cannot categorize or control, Valeris said quietly. It's why breathweaving terrifies them. The magic comes from within, follows emotional rather than mathematical rules. It defies their careful hierarchies. So they nearly eradicated an entire magical tradition because it didn't fit their tidy system? Arsel's voice hardened. Destroyed countless lives, talents, potential, all for the sake of control? Yes. Valeris met his angry gaze steadily. They did. My people did. Yet, here you are, on the run with a human breathweaver. Arsel studied her face across the fire. Why? 3 centuries of career, status, security. Why throw it away for this? Valeris was silent so long, Arsel thought she wouldn't answer. I spent my life cataloging the past, she finally said. Recording history without questioning it. Then I found discrepancies in the archives. References to human magical traditions that couldn't be reconciled with official accounts. The more I dug, the more evidence I found of deliberate erasure. She stared into the flames. I realized I wasn't preserving history. I was perpetuating a lie. That explains your research, not why you helped me. Her violet eyes lifted to his. Because seeing you perform that verse, watching raw creation flow from simple words, I felt something I haven't in centuries. Wonder. A small, self-deprecating smile curved her lips. Also, I've never been very good at doing what I'm told. Arsel found himself returning her smile, surprised by her candor. Well then, since we're sharing, I spent my life thinking I was broken. That my magic was a twisted curse. Just enough to want more, never enough to get it. Finding out it was deliberately taken from humans. That I'm not damaged, but part of something ancient and powerful. I can't go back to hiding in taverns, crafting meaningless rhymes for copper. What will you do instead? Find these echo chambers. Learn what breathweaving truly is, and then... He poked the fire, sending sparks dancing upward. And then make sure no one can take it from us again. They fell into companionable silence. Arsel found himself watching Valeris as she gazed at the stars. Her profile, sharp yet delicate in the firelight, the weight of centuries evident in her eyes, despite her youthful appearance. How old are you, exactly? He asked abruptly. 237, she replied, relatively young for an elf. Arsel whistled. That's quite an age gap between us. Worried I'm taking advantage of your youth and innocence? She asked dryly. More concerned I'll bore you with my fleeting human perspectives. On the contrary, she said, turning to face him fully. Your perspective is anything but boring. Impulsive, reckless, and infuriatingly simplistic at times, but never boring. I'll take that as a compliment. You would. But there was no bite in her words, and when she smiled, it reached her eyes. Arsel felt something shift between them, a current deeper than camaraderie. He quickly looked away, uncomfortable with the implications. She would live for centuries after he was dust. Any connection between them was destined for heartbreak. We should sleep, he said, breaking the moment. Early start tomorrow. Valeris nodded, her expression unreadable as she settled onto her bedroll, but Arsel felt her gaze on him long after he pretended to sleep. Whisper's End nestled in a valley beneath the first peaks of the Howling Mountains. Unlike the rigid geometric perfection of elven settlements or the chaotic sprawl of human cities, the village blended organically with its surroundings. Buildings of stone and timber grew from the hillsides as if they'd sprouted there, connected by winding paths that followed the natural contours of the land. Arsel and Valeris approached warily, mindful of silencers who might have reached the village before them. The journey had taken 4 days, slowed by the need to avoid main roads and the occasional patrol of elven guards. They drew curious glances from villagers, humans, half-elves, and even a few full-blooded elves, all coexisting with surprising harmony. Arsel noticed subtle signs of breathweaving integrated into daily life. A baker murmuring verses that kept bread rising perfectly. A carpenter whose whispered words guided his tools. Children playing games involving rhyming challenges that made small objects float. They don't hide it here, Arcel whispered, amazed. Remote locations have advantages, Valeris replied. And the mountain stone disrupts magical detection spells. The council knows breath-weaving persists in places like this, but considers the effort of eradication greater than the threat posed. Until recently, Arcel noted. Otherwise, why the increased silencer activity? They found the village square, where an old woman sat weaving a large loom. Unlike the other weavers nearby who worked with physical thread, her fingers danced through empty air, pulling and twisting at nothing. Yet a beautiful tapestry materialized beneath her hands, woven from what appeared to be solidified light. "Excuse me," Arcel said, approaching cautiously. "We're looking for the sparrow's nest?" The woman's fingers never stopped their intricate dance, but her eyes, one blue, one amber, lifted to study them.
"Sparrow nests where she pleases,"
she replied.
"Sometimes in eaves, sometimes in the hollow trees."
"Gristle sent us," Arcel tried again. "We seek Sela." At this, the weaver's hands stilled. The partial tapestry rippled once, then solidified. Closer now, Arcel could see it depicted a scene of bizarre familiarity. The Elven Conservatory during the Convergence, complete with a tiny figure that could only be himself, surrounded by flickering flames.
"You've caused quite a commotion, wordsmith,"
the woman said. She rose with surprising grace for her apparent age.
"And you've brought unexpected company."
Valeris stepped forward. "Archivist Valeris Moonweave of the Historical Collections."
"I know who you are,"
the woman replied. Her mismatched eyes narrowed.
"The question is whether you know who you are, Archivist. Few of your kind choose knowledge over comfort."
"I choose truth over lies," Valeris said simply. The old woman's severe expression softened marginally.
"Well spoken. I am Sela Halfmoon, former junior archivist of the Elven Conservatory, current elder of Whisperer's End, and lifelong pain in the Magical Preservation Council's collected backside."
Arcel blinked in surprise. "You worked at the conservatory?"
340 years ago,
Sela confirmed.
"Until I discovered what they'd done to human magic and made the mistake of expressing moral objections. I narrowly escaped the same fate as those who created the echo chambers."
She gestured toward a path leading up into the mountains.
"Walk with me. There's much to discuss. These old bones need daily movement to stay functional."
As they climbed a well-worn path into the foothills, Sela explained the history Arcel and Valeris had begun to uncover, but with crucial details they'd missed. Human breath-weaving had indeed been deliberately suppressed through a magical plague, but not merely out of elven desire for superiority.
"Breath-weaving is raw creation magic,"
Sela explained.
"Direct channeling of magical energy through language, the most primal and powerful magical form. While elven magic excels at precision, human voice magic possessed unmatched creative potential. The combination of the two traditions was producing innovations that frightened the Archmage Council. Magic they couldn't predict or control."
"So they engineered the plague?" Arcel said bitterly.
"Yes, but not as a genocidal act as they saw it. They truly believed unrestrained breath-weaving threatened the fabric of reality itself. Some humans have begun experimenting with verses that altered fundamental natural laws. The elves feared catastrophe."
"That doesn't justify what they did," Valeris objected.
"Of course not,"
Sela agreed.
"But understanding their reasoning matters if you hope to undo their work. The spell plague wasn't designed to kill humans, only to sever their innate connection between language and magical energy. Breath-weaving was redirected into artistic and emotional channels instead of magical ones."
"Then how do people like me exist?" Arcel asked.
"The plague wasn't universally effective. Some humans possessed natural resistance. Others found ways to partially circumvent its effects through intense training. These survivors created the echo chambers, both as a sanctuary and a repository for the counterspell."
"There's a counterspell?" Valeris asked sharply.
Of sorts,
Sela hedged.
it's complicated.
Before she could elaborate, a distant sound stopped them all. A low, thrumming hum that Arsel felt in his bones more than heard.
Silencer airships,
Sela murmured, looking skyward.
they found us.
In the clear mountain air, Arsel spotted them. 3 sleek vessels propelled by complex elven magic, gliding toward Whisper's End with ominous purpose.
We need to reach the echo chambers,
Sela said urgently.
now.
They abandoned the path, climbing steep mountainsides and squeezing through narrow passes as the airships descended on the village below. Occasionally, they caught glimpses of black-robed figures disembarking, silver wands glinting in the sunlight. Will the villagers be safe? Arsel asked between labored breaths.
They know how to protect themselves,
Sela replied grimly.
but the silencers aren't after them. They're after you, and the knowledge you might uncover.
Hours later, exhausted and scraped from difficult passages, they reached a sheer cliff face that appeared to be a dead end. Sela approached it confidently, placing both palms against the stone.
The true door only opens to voice,
She said, turning to Arsel.
Your verse must speak to the mountain's heart.
Arsel stared at the blank rock face, uncertain. What should I say?
The mountain responds to truth,
Sela advised.
not cleverness, not technique, personal truth.
Arsel placed his hands on the cool stone, closing his eyes. He thought of all that had brought him here, the shame of his curse, the revelation of its true nature, the anger at what had been taken from his people, and beneath it all, a desperate hope that he might reclaim what was lost. The words came not from calculation, but from the depths of his being. Stone that guards forgotten song, I stand here broken, yet belong. Half-silenced voice that yearns to be the breath of ancient magic free. Open now to one who seeks, not power, but truth that speaks. The cliff face trembled beneath his fingers. A seam appeared in the rock, widening to reveal a passageway leading deep into the mountain. Cool air rushed out, carrying the faint sound of distant voices singing in harmony.
Well done, wordsmith,
Sela said softly.
the chambers welcome you.
They entered the mountain, the opening ceiling behind them. Phosphorescent fungi lit their way down a winding tunnel that gradually widened as they descended. The singing grew louder, not a single melody but many, overlapping in complex patterns that somehow avoided discord. The tunnel opened abruptly onto a breathtaking sight. They stood on a ledge overlooking a vast natural amphitheater, where terraced stone platforms housed perhaps 50 people of varying ages. Some sat in meditation, others practiced verses in pairs or small groups, and some sang in continuous shifts, maintaining the harmonies that filled the chamber. Above them, the cavern ceiling opened to the sky through a natural chimney, filling the space with soft, directed light. An elderly woman broke from a nearby group and approached. Despite her age, she moved with fluidity, and her eyes held the same intensity Arsel had seen in Bram.
Sela,
She greeted.
your message reached us. We've begun preparations.
Her gaze shifted to Arsel and Valeris.
The wordsmith, I presume, and an elf?
Surprise colored her voice.
Archivist Valeris Moonweave,
Sela introduced.
She's proven herself an ally. And yes, this is Arsel Thorn, the Breathweaver who announced himself so dramatically at the convergence.
Arsel shifted uncomfortably under their scrutiny. I'm still getting used to that title,
The chambers have awaited you.
the woman said cryptically.
I am Ear, voice keeper of the echo. Come, there's little time.
The inner sanctum of the echo chambers was a smaller cavern where the acoustics were so perfect that the slightest whisper carried with crystal clarity. 7 elders waited for them, seated in a semicircle around an ancient stone table etched with symbols Arsel couldn't decipher.
These are master breathweavers,
Air explained.
the keepers of our oldest traditions.
One by one, the masters demonstrated their art. Verses that transported listeners into vivid illusions, words that temporarily altered physical properties of objects. songs that invoked elemental forces. Arsel watched in awe, recognizing the raw potential of what his own untrained abilities might become.
For centuries, we have preserved what remains of breath-weaving,
Air continued.
collecting those born with immunity to a plague, teaching them to control and expand their gifts. But we have always known that our tradition was incomplete, crippled by what the elves took from us.
The counterspell, Arsel said. Selah mentioned it. The masters exchanged glances. An ancient man with skin like crumpled parchment spoke, his voice surprisingly strong. Not exactly a counterspell, he clarified. More accurately, an unfinished work. The original Breathweavers who created these chambers began crafting a verse powerful enough to undo the plague, to restore humanity's connection to voice magic. But the elves found them before it was completed. Valeris stepped forward. You're saying you have an incomplete spell that could potentially restore breathweaving to all humans? Yes, the old man confirmed. The first verse exists, but it lacks its final stanza. The culmination that would activate its power across all affected by the plague. For centuries, we've sought someone with the gift strong enough to intuitively compose that ending. And you think that's me? Arsel asked incredulously.
We hoped, Air said. Your display at the Convergence suggests a connection to breath-weaving stronger than we've seen in generations. But there's no certainty. The first verse is complex, drawing on linguistic patterns not commonly used today. Even attempting to complete it carries risks.
Arsel felt the weight of expectation settling on his shoulders. What kind of risks? Magical backlash, said another master. A woman with silver hair coiled atop her head. The incomplete verse contains tremendous stored potential. Channeling such power incorrectly could damage your own magical capacity. Or worse. But if it works? Arsel pressed.
If it works, Air said carefully, the spell plague will be neutralized. Humans will begin to rediscover their innate connection to breath-weaving. Not immediately. It would take generations for the full capacity to return. But the healing would begin.
Arsel looked to Valeris, whose expression remained carefully neutral. What do you think? Her violet eyes met his. I think the Elven magical establishment would consider this the ultimate threat. They'd respond with everything in their arsenal. That's not what I asked. Valeris hesitated, then straightened. I think knowledge suppressed is knowledge lost to all. I think that what was taken should be restored. Her voice softened. And I think if anyone could complete this verse, it would be you. A commotion from the outer chamber interrupted them, shouts and the unmistakable crackling energy of offensive magic.
Silencers,
Selah confirmed grimly after listening to a messenger.
They found the entrance. Our defenses won't hold them for long.
How? Valeris demanded. This place is shielded, hidden.
Foul mind magics. It hardly matters now,
Air cut in. She turned to Arsel.
We need your decision, wordsmith. Will you attempt the first verse?
Arsel's mind raced. The hope of restoring what was taken from humanity warred with the fear of failure, of making himself a target, of the unknown consequences. Then he thought of Bram standing defiant in the safe house, of Lark captured while helping others escape, of countless humans throughout history whose gifts had been labeled curses. Show me the verse, he said firmly. The first verse was inscribed on ancient vellum displayed within a crystal case at the center of the stone table. The masters carefully removed it, unrolling the delicate material to reveal text written in flowing script that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light.
We'll begin the support and harmonies,
Air explained as the masters took positions around the chamber.
You must read the existing verse aloud, then compose the final stanza from within the magical current it creates.
Arsel studied the text, familiarizing himself with its rhythms and patterns. It was complex, yet intuitive, weaving references to voice, breath, and natural magic into a tapestry of sound. The final section remained blank, waiting for completion. Sounds of battle drew closer. Arcel glanced toward the entrance where Breath Weavers had assembled defensive positions.
There's no more time,
Seela urged.
begin now!
The master started in a low, resonant chant that filled the chamber with vibration. Arcel took a deep breath and began to read, his voice finding the cadence naturally. From first breath drawn in morning light to final sigh of deepest night, our words are more than simple sound, in them the soul of magic found. Through syllable and turn of phrase, through whispered hope and high-sung praise, the world responds to human voice not by demand, but by free choice. The plague that severed thought from power, that shattered magic's finest hour, was born of fear, not born of right, a shadow cast to dim our light. As Arcel read, the air around him began to glow with soft luminescence. Each word felt both ordinary and profound, as if he spoke to the present chamber and to some deeper layer of reality. The master's harmony wrapped around his voice, amplifying and directing it. He reached the end of the existing text and paused, waiting for inspiration. The chamber hummed with expectant energy. The master's harmonies continued, creating a foundation for whatever he would add. But no words came. Panic flickered through him. He caught Valeris' concerned gaze across the chamber. In that moment, a realization struck him. The original Breathweavers had approached this as a tool to simply reverse what had been done to them. But mere reversal would only perpetuate the cycle of magical dominance. The final stanza needed to be something else entirely. Arcel closed his eyes, letting go of his prepared thoughts, his desire for revenge against the elves, his personal ambitions. Instead, he opened himself to the pure connection between voice and magic, not as a human gift to be reclaimed, but as a universal truth to be acknowledged. Words flowed from him, not composed but discovered. Not to reclaim what was once taken, nor to ensure old bonds be shaken, but to unite what was divided, so magic flows where gift provided. Let voice and wand no longer stand as barriers between each hand, but as twin paths to shared creation, each talent finding just relation. Through breath or gesture, word or sign, let magic answer true design, not bound by race or clan or birth, but by the heart that proves its worth. The chamber erupted in blinding light. Arcel felt the verse vibrating through him, connecting to something vast and ancient. For a moment, he glimpsed the magical weave that underlay reality, not as separate elven and human traditions, but as a single tapestry with infinite methods of access. When the light coalesced, flowing outward from the chamber in a wave that passed through stone as if it were air, Arcel staggered, suddenly exhausted. Valeris reached him first, supporting him as his knees buckled. "What happened?" he gasped. "Did it work?" Before anyone could answer, the chamber entrance exploded inward. Archmagister Thelin strode through the dust, flanked by a dozen silencers. Their silver wands were drawn, but they hesitated at the threshold, confusion evident in their postures.
Too late, Thelin,
Seela called.
The first verse is complete.
Thelin's golden eyes widened with rage and fear. "What have you done?" He pointed his wand at Arcel. "Stop the spell! Reverse it!" "I can't," Arcel replied honestly. "And I wouldn't if I could." Thelin's wand began to glow with gathered power. "Then you leave me no choice." Arcel braced for the attack, too drained to compose a defensive verse. But as Thelin attempted to release his spell, something unexpected happened. Instead of focused energy, multicolored light spilled from his wand in a chaotic fountain, accompanied by words that burst from the Archmagister's lips against his will. "Magic flows through more than wood, more paths to power than understood. Truth spoken breaks illusion's wall. My control was never real at all." Thelin stumbled back, horrified by his own involuntary verse. The other silences experienced similar effects, their carefully controlled magic spilling into spontaneous expressions, their voices speaking truths they had suppressed. Valeris stepped forward. "The verse didn't just restore human magic," she realized. It transformed the relationship between all beings in magic. No racial advantage, no monopoly of method.
Impossible, Felin whispered, staring at his wand. You can't have altered the fundamental nature of magic itself. We didn't, Arsel said, finding strength to stand unaided. We removed an artificial constraint. Magic always had multiple expressions. Your ancestors just made sure only one form was accessible. He approached Thelin cautiously. It's over. The monopoly is broken. Thelin's face contorted with rage. He lunged at Arsel with his wand raised like a dagger. I'll kill you before I let everything we built collapse! Arsel had no time to dodge, no energy to cast. Then, Valeris was between them, her slender frame blocking Thelin's rage. She spoke a single verse, not in the formal patterns of elven magic, but in the free form of breath-weaving. Truth stops the hand of blind hatred's strike, shows paths ahead, different yet alike! Thelin froze mid-motion, his wand centimeters from Valeris. His eyes widened in shock, not at her intervention, but at the nature of it. You, he breathed. An elf, using voice magic. The gift responds to the heart, not the shape of the ear, she replied quietly. That's what the first verse revealed. No race owns magic. It belongs to all who approach it with respect. The fight seemed to drain from Thelin. He lowered his wand slowly, looking around at his silencers who stood in confusion, their magical authority suddenly uncertain. What happens now? He asked, his voice hollow.
Now,
Selah said, stepping forward.
we begin the hard part, learning to share what was never meant to be hoarded.
6 months later, Arsel stood on a balcony overlooking the central courtyard of what had once been the Elven Conservatory of the Arcane Arts, now renamed the Luminar Academy of Magical Studies. Its doors had been opened to students of all races, with magical aptitude of any form. Below, a class practiced in the open air, Elven students struggling with the intuitive patterns of breath-weaving, alongside humans grappling with the precise movements of wand magic. Progress was slow on both sides, centuries of separation creating barriers that would take generations to fully dissolve. But it had begun. Admiring your handiwork? Valeris asked, joining him at the railing. 6 months of sun had warmed her normally pale complexion, and teaching had softened the academic stiffness in her bearing. Our handiwork, Arsel corrected. I just spoke the words. You had the courage to question everything you'd been taught. A trait we share, apparently. She handed him a letter bearing the seal of the Whisperer's End. More reports from Selah. The change continues to spread, slower in some regions, faster in others. The Magical Preservation Council has officially disbanded, though I wouldn't be surprised if splinter groups yet remain. And Thelin? Still in seclusion, trying to understand exactly what his ancestors did, and why. Valeris leaned against the railing. Ironically, he may become our greatest historian of the period. Arsel nodded, gazing across the transformed campus. Change had not come without resistance. Many elves still regarded breath-weaving with suspicion, while some humans harbored deep resentment over centuries of suppression. The first verse had removed magical barriers, but cultural ones would take longer to dismantle. I received an invitation to the Council of Voices next month, Arsel said. They want me to help develop teaching standards for breath-weaving techniques. Will you accept? He shrugged. Probably. Though I'm more performer than professor. What about you? Still combing through the newly opened archives? Every day. Her eyes lit with academic excitement. The combined knowledge of both traditions is revealing magical theories neither side could have developed alone. We've only scratched the surface of what's possible. Arsel studied her as she described recent discoveries, animated in a way he seldom saw outside of their private conversations. The subtle stir that had begun in mountain caves had deepened over months of shared work, despite complications neither of them acknowledged aloud. Valeris, he interrupted her academic discourse. Are we making a mistake? She didn't pretend to misunderstand. Probably. I'll be gone in 50 years. 60 if I'm lucky.
You'll have centuries after.
I know. She met his gaze directly. I've considered that. Extensively.
And
I've decided that some experiences are worth having, even if they cannot last.
Her voice softened.
Isn't that what your verse was ultimately about? That value lies not in permanence, but in authentic connection, however brief.
Arsel smiled slowly. Using my own words against me. That's fighting dirty.
I learned from the best.
She returned his smile, then grew serious again.
The old Elven way was to avoid anything fleeting, to insulate ourselves from change and loss. It left us stagnant, afraid of innovation, terrified of the unpredictable. I don't want that life anymore.
Arsel reached across the space between them, taking her hand. So we just see where this goes? Despite everything?
Despite everything,
she agreed.
Or perhaps because of it.
Below them, a young human student successfully completed her first wand charm, while nearby, an elven boy spoke a verse that made flowers bloom in his palm. Different paths, different methods, but the same wondering smile spread across both faces. The universal recognition of connection to something larger than themselves. I can live with that, Arsel said, squeezing Valeris's hand. For as long as I live. Poet, she accused fondly. Guilty as charged, he grinned. Though, I prefer wordsmith.